The big boy was not a sudden leap. It was the final evolution of an idea that started with the Challenger. Steam legend often casts the big boy as a miracle, an overnight leap in locomotive power, but that story leaves out the real turning point. Before Union Pacific's most famous giant, there was a machine that upended every expectation about what a freight engine could do. The Challenger didn't just fill a gap, it rewrote the rules. Railroad magazines in the late 1930s buzzed about a new breed of articulated locomotive, one that could muscle heavy trains up mountain grades and then sprint across the plains at speeds that left older engines in the dust. Crews who ran them spoke of a machine that felt as nimble as it was strong, a rare combination in an era when power usually meant slow, grinding climbs. The Challenger was not built to be a showpiece. It was born out of necessity, a direct answer to the stubborn geography of the American West, where steep grades and tight curves punished any locomotive that was not both flexible and fierce. Its two-engine design under a single boiler was a mechanical gamble, daring to combine brute force with the kind of speed that freight schedules demanded but rarely received. For the first time, an articulated engine was not just a mountain crawler. It could keep up with the clock even as it hauled thousands of tons through the Wasatch and beyond. Yet the Challenger's story is more than a list of technical achievements. It's the missing link that made the big boy possible. The Challenger proved that power and velocity could coexist, but it also revealed the limits of even the boldest engineering. The big boy did not arrive out of nowhere. It was the next inevitable step. To understand how Union Pacific reached for the biggest, you have to start with the monster that came before. In 1936, Union Pacific put a new kind of locomotive on the rails, one designed to do what no American freight engine had managed before. The first Challenger, delivered by the American Locomotive Company that spring, was the prototype for a fleet that would eventually number 105 units across the Union Pacific system. These engines rolled out in several waves: the initial batch from the American Locomotive Company plant in Schenectady, a second order from Baldwin, and later additional units as wartime demand surged. Each was built to the same essential pattern: two sets of 6 driving wheels hinged under a single boiler, with 69-inch drivers and a boiler pressure of 250 pounds per square inch. That combination allowed the Challenger to pull heavy trains at speeds over 60 miles per hour, an unheard of feat for articulated steam at the time. But Union Pacific was not alone in chasing this formula. Across North America, the 466 four-wheel arrangement caught on with other railroads, from the Baltimore and Ohio to the Santa Fe. By the end of the production run, 252 Challengers had been built nationwide, with Union Pacific's 105 engines representing the largest single fleet. These numbers stand out in the builders' registers and the Interstate Commerce Commission locomotive rosters, anchoring the Challenger's reputation as more than just a one-off experiment. It was a proven workhorse, a staple of mainline freight from the Wasatch to the Pacific coast. Despite these impressive totals, the Challenger's story is grounded in operational reality. Even with its power and speed, the locomotive could not always conquer the steepest grades alone. On the toughest stretches, helper engines were still needed, and the costs of extra crews and maintenance piled up. These facts, written into dispatch logs and shop bulletins, reveal the Challenger's double legacy. It broke new ground, but it also drew the blueprint for something even bigger. The numbers, 105 for Union Pacific and 252 across the country, are more than statistics. They are the measure of a turning point, a moment when American railroading began to believe that an articulated engine could be both fast and strong, but also saw that the search for the ultimate freight locomotive was not yet finished. From Ogden, Utah to Green River, Wyoming, the Union Pacific Main Line crosses some of the most punishing railroad terrain in North America. The Wasatch grade, stretching for dozens of miles, rises at more than 2% in places, a number that might seem small on paper, but spells trouble for any locomotive charged with moving thousands of tons of freight. Railroad engineering bulletins from the 1930s detail this climb: a sustained 2.2% ruling grade, a twisting route that snakes through canyons, and a relentless pull of gravity that never lets up. For steam crews, every mile east of Ogden meant a test of both man and machine. The numbers tell their own story. On a 2% grade, a train faces more than twice the resistance it would on level ground, and every curve adds to the load. The Wasatch route demanded locomotives that could produce immense, tractive effort just to keep the wheels turning. Earlier engines, rigid-framed or smaller articulated types, often stalled or slipped, especially in bad weather. Dispatchers tracked every foot of elevation gained and every ton of freight moved, knowing that a single miscalculation could strand a train for hours. The Challenger was designed with these specific obstacles in mind. Its articulated frame allowed it to swing through the sharp curves without binding, while its two sets of driving wheels spread the locomotive's weight across the rails, maximizing grip. Yet, even with all this muscle, the grade's unbroken climb pushed the Challenger to its limits. Freight schedules depended on the ability to maintain speed over the mountain, but the physics of the Wasatch left little margin for error. The geography of this corridor, documented in Union Pacific's own route maps and grade profiles, set the stage for every innovation that followed. Here, the mountain didn't just shape the railroad, it dictated what kind of locomotive could survive. Every steep mile between Ogden and Green River demanded more than raw horsepower. Freight crews faced a routine that wore on nerves and timetables alike: doubleheading. When a heavy train reached the base of the Wasatch grade, it would halt at a siding. A helper engine, sometimes another Challenger and often a smaller Mikado, would couple on, with its crew climbing aboard for a few hours of hard labor. Assignment ledgers from the late 1930s show these stops were not occasional. They were scheduled into every eastbound run over the mountains. Each stop added precious minutes, sometimes half an hour, as brakemen walked the length of the train, checked couplings, and confirmed airlines. Fuel and water consumption spiked too, with two engines burning through coal and water at rates the accounting office tracked in thick, handwritten ledgers. Oral histories from retired firemen recall the rhythm of these climbs. One remembered that you would feel the slack go out, the whole train shudder, and then both engines would dig in, the strain of two crews working in sync but separately. Communication was limited to whistle signals and hand gestures. If a helper failed, the entire train could stall, blocking the main line and backing up traffic for miles. Payroll records show the cost. Every helper assignment meant another engineer, another fireman, overtime hours, and extra maintenance at the next terminal. The Challenger was built to reduce this burden, but on the steepest stretches, even its advanced design could not always go it alone. The logistical drag of helper practice, documented in dispatch logs and crew rosters, became a stubborn obstacle, one that no amount of raw tractive effort could fully erase. These inefficiencies, measured in lost minutes and added dollars, set the stage for Union Pacific's next move: a locomotive that could finally conquer the mountains without stopping for help. 2 engines, 1 boiler. On paper, the concept sounds almost mythical, but in the Challenger, it became real steel and fire. The heart of this locomotive was its articulated frame: 2 separate sets of 6 driving wheels, each with its own cylinders and valve gear, joined beneath a single, massive boiler. This was not just a clever trick for more power. It was a structural leap that let a single locomotive bend and flex through the tightest mountain curves without losing its grip or its momentum. Lima Locomotive Works captured the logic in a 1936 cutaway drawing. The boiler stretched across both engine units with a single firebox feeding steam to all 4 cylinders. Unlike the earlier mallets, with their compound expansion and split steam paths, the Challenger's simple expansion design sent high-pressure steam from one firebox to both sets of driving wheels. The exhaust from both engines channeled back through a common smoke box, giving the locomotive a unified breathing system. This meant that for the first time, two powerful engines could work together under one roof, managed by one crew, and fueled from a single tender. The articulation itself was a feat of mechanical problem-solving. The rear engine was fixed to the boiler, while the front engine pivoted on a hinge, allowing it to swing laterally up to 30 degrees. This flexibility let the Challenger tackle the winding Wasatch route, where sharp curves had defeated stiffer, rigid frame engines. The weight of the boiler was distributed across all 12 drivers, maximizing traction but also spreading the load so that the rails themselves did not buckle under the strain. Each set of drivers could move independently, but both were powered by the same fire and steam, an elegant solution to the problem of mountain railroading. Chief Mechanical Engineer John C. Hughes pushed for this design, convinced that only a true articulated machine could meet Union Pacific's demands. The result was a locomotive that could twist through canyon bends and then stretch out on the open prairie, keeping heavy freight moving at speeds that once seemed impossible for a giant of its size. The Challenger's shared boiler articulation was not just a technical curiosity, it was the backbone of an engine that redefined what was possible on American rails. And it set the template for every high-speed, articulated freight locomotive that followed. At the heart of the Challenger's reputation was a set of numbers that did more than look good on a blueprint. They changed how fast and how far a freight train could move. The 69-inch driving wheels stood out in an era when most articulated freight engines used smaller, 57-inch drivers, which were better for brute force but not for running at speed. Union Pacific design memos from 1935 and 1936 explain the logic. Bigger drivers meant the Challenger could keep the tonnage rolling at 60 miles per hour or more, while still gripping the rails hard enough to climb the Wasatch. It was a balancing act. Too large, and the engine would lose the low-speed muscle needed for mountain grades. Too small, and the wheels would spin themselves out of a job on the flatlands. The 69-inch choice was not just a compromise, it was a calculated sweet spot, letting the Challenger outpace the old mallets and keep up with the clock. But wheels alone could not deliver on the promise. Boiler pressure was the next lever. Early Challengers operated at 265 pounds per square inch, a figure that crept up to 280 pounds per square inch in later batches. In plain terms, that is steam force greater than the weight of a city bus pressing on every square inch inside the boiler. This high pressure fed 4 simple expansion cylinders, each measuring 22 by 32 inches. Later 23 by 32, pushing out around 100,000 pounds of tractive effort. That is enough to start a 70-car train from a standstill, but also enough to keep it moving fast once the grades eased. The numbers played off each other. Larger drivers allowed higher speeds, but only if the engine could make enough steam to keep up. The Challenger's boiler, with its wide firebox and modern superheater, delivered. It could burn through 2,500 pounds of coal and 4,500 gallons of water every hour at full tilt. The result was a locomotive that did not bog down when the schedule called for 55 or 60 miles per hour, even with a heavy load. Union Pacific's own field tests told the story in hard data. On a 1.14% grade, a Challenger could haul 5,000 tons at 55 miles per hour, numbers that left the old articulated engines in the dust. Dynamometer cars logged continuous drawbar horsepower of 4,800 at speed, and crews reported a steady, almost effortless rhythm as the engine ate up the miles. This balance of speed and power was no accident. It was the outcome of deliberate choices: driver size, boiler pressure, and cylinder dimensions, all tuned for the kind of freight service that would define the next era of American railroading. The Challenger did not just move trains, it moved the goalposts for what a freight locomotive could be. Union Pacific's test records from 1937 make the Challenger's promise plain. 5,000 tons of freight, 60 miles per hour, and a dynamometer car recording nearly 4,800 drawbar horsepower at speed. For a freight locomotive, these numbers were almost unthinkable. The Challenger could start a heavy train on a steep grade and then, once over the summit, accelerate to speeds that rivaled passenger runs. But the numbers only tell part of the story. Oral histories from engineers and firemen fill in the rest. Crews remember the constant tension between the schedule and the realities of the machine. Running at 55 or 60 miles per hour with a full load was not just a matter of opening the throttle. Every trip demanded careful attention to water and coal consumption, with the firemen shoveling nearly 2,500 pounds of coal an hour and keeping a close eye on the boiler's pressure gauge. The engineer, meanwhile, watched the speedometer and felt for the subtle vibration that warned of a hot bearing or a slipping driver. A Challenger could cover the distance from Ogden to Green River in record time, but it also meant a grueling shift for the crew, especially when maintenance intervals loomed ever closer. Shop records from the Omaha facility show that rear driver bearings required inspection and relubrication every 250,000 miles, a figure that sounds generous until you factor in the relentless pace of mainline service. One retired engineer recalled, "You'd get into a rhythm with her, but you never let your guard down." At that speed, with that much weight behind you, a tired bearing or a missed signal could end your day in a hurry. The Challenger's reputation for speed and muscle was earned mile by mile, but so was its reputation for being hard on both men and machines. These realities, documented in test logs, shop bulletins, and crew memories, shaped Union Pacific's next steps as the search for a locomotive that could deliver even more, with fewer compromises, continued. Union Pacific's board met in 1941 with a single goal: end the mountain bottleneck once and for all. The Challenger had proven that an articulated locomotive could be both fast and strong, but the records from Omaha and Cheyenne told a harder truth. Shop bulletins flagged persistent rear driver bearing wear, especially on the punishing Wasatch climbs. Dispatch logs still scheduled helpers for the steepest grades, and the cost of extra crews and maintenance kept rising. The Challenger had moved the goalposts, but it had not erased the line. So the design office issued a new brief, one that called for a locomotive to pull more than 4,000 tons over the Wasatch without stopping for help. The answer became the big boy, a 4884 machine, stretching the Challenger's philosophy to its limits. The new engine would carry a boiler pressure of 300 pounds per square inch, 8 driving axles, and a firebox big enough to swallow coal by the ton. But every major feature, the articulated frame, the focus on high speed, the demand for solo mountain performance, was an echo of lessons learned from the Challenger's years on the line. Yet the Challenger's story did not end in the shadow of its successor. One engine, Union Pacific No. 3985, built in 1943, escaped the scrapper's torch and returned to steam in the late 20th century. For decades, 3985 ran excursion trains across the West, its drivers pounding out the same rhythm that once set the standard for freight. Today, it stands as living proof that the Challenger was more than a stepping stone. It was the bridge that made the age of the big boy possible, and its legacy still moves down the rails. The Challenger's legacy is not just steel and steam, it's the blueprint for every freight giant that followed. Its bold mix of speed and raw power set new standards, even as its limits drove engineers to dream bigger. Today, innovation still builds on imperfect breakthroughs. The Challenger reminds us, progress is rarely a leap, it's a relentless climb. What overlooked giants are shaping tomorrow's revolutions? Share your thoughts below.